Good morning, sociology. So this is week 2. So week 2 also means chapter 2 in this instance. So chapter 2 is on sociological research. At the end of this lecture, I will tell you what's going to be going on in the second lecture and any other announcements that may pertain to the class. So, as well as assignments that you have due this week. So let's get started with sociological research. Okay. So, as you already know, chapter 2 is on sociological research. However, I want to start off with a question, right? And most of the pictures, most of the figures, most of the tables that you will find in the lectures that I present, they come directly from your textbook. Here's one of them. Many believe that crime goes up during the full moon, but scientific research does not support this conclusion. And what I want you to focus on is the first part, right? Many believe that crime rates go up during a full moon. How do you think a scientist, this scientist could be of any field, right? Sociologists, psychologists, astronomer. How do you think that these types of scientists would answer or find answers to that statement? How do you think that they would explore that question if I phrased it such as, does crime go up during a full moon? What kinds of research methods would you utilize if you were currently in a high school classroom that told you to create a hypothesis and test it? Keep that in mind for the remainder of this lecture. Okay? Chapter 2 starts off by talking about the scientific method. The scientific method is an essential tool in research, specifically in sociological research. The first step of the scientific method is to ask a question, right? So the first step of the scientific method is to ask a question, describe a problem, and identify specific areas of interest, right? So this is not just any random question, but it's a question that is pertinent, right? It's a question that people find interesting or want to explore. There might be a need for this specific question to be answered. So for example, before COVID hit the United States, right? I remember my sister in Luxembourg being, telling me a week or two prior, right, that, oh my God, Luxembourg has been locked down, right? There's a pandemic. It's called COVID, right? And it wasn't that well known out here. And one of the questions that I was having as like we literally saw country after country after country until it reached the United States, at Canada, like our sector of the globe, until like we shut down. One of the questions that I had was, what is COVID? Right? And the reason that this is an important question, or was an important question at the time, and it's still important today, right? Because doctors, nurses still don't have a treatment for it, right? But the reason that this question is so important is because it's relatable to the time. People are dealing with it. People don't know how to treat it. So ask a question. Then the next step of the scientific method is to research existing sources, right? COVID comes from a specific strain that we already have information about. So there are some there is some research out there, not on COVID-19, but other forms of SARS and things like that. So with your own type of question, right, find existing research. The next step is to formulate a hypothesis. A hypothesis, your book specifically states, is an assumption about how two or more variables are related. Okay? So this is slightly different from just asking a question. With a hypothesis, you're making a conjectural statement about a relationship between variables. So we're talking about independent and dependent variables. The independent variable is the cause of the change, right? And the dependent variable is the effect. Your book actually has some great examples of formulated hypotheses that you guys should take a look at. And I'm just going to state a couple. That's why I was looking down, right? But here's an example of a hypothesis. And again, this is on page 33 in your textbook, okay? Here's one example. The greater the police patrol presence, the safer the neighborhood. This is a hypothesis, right? The independent variable is police patrol presence. Think about why, right? Police patrol presence cause the change in the neighborhood being safer. And safer neighborhoods are the dependent variable, which is the effect that the police presence has. One more example from your book. The greater the factory lighting, the higher the productivity, okay? The independent variable in this case is the factory lighting. The independent variable is factory lighting. Why? Because factory lighting causes the change leading to more productivity, which is the effect of factory lighting being better, okay? Besides looking at these examples, I want you to do those flips in try creating hypotheses yourself, okay? There are things that we can actually create hypotheses with events that are going out there, that are happening outside, right? So try to create hypotheses with certain current events, right? You could create some with COVID. You could create some with certain protesting and movements. You could create some with immigration policies and laws, etc. After formulating a hypothesis, you then move to design and conducting a study, right? You have to figure out how you are going to gather data on your hypothesis, right? Are you going to enter the field and conduct interviews? Are you going to use a raw source of data that has already been created? Secondary analysis. Are you going to use historical and archival analysis, etc.? And we'll go into those methods in depth later. Then you need to draw conclusions. Once you've designed your study, you can now draw some conclusions, okay? You can now tell people some of the findings that you have found. Next and last, you report the results, okay? So if any of you have ever seen journal publications, sociological, psychology, social psych, historical journal articles, these results take the form of a publication, okay? Or even books, because a lot of sociologists publish their dissertations, and psychologists. Okay, so one of the things that we're concerned with in sociology is causality. If there are any terms in this textbook or in my lectures that you do not understand, please pause and Google, right? But causality, I have it here, is a relationship of cause and effect that does not require a direct relationship. Don't confuse causality with causation, okay? Causation is where there must be a direct and connectable cause and effect relationship that shows the effect cannot happen without the cause. So oftentimes I will steer clear of causation. Many times we find, with a lot of scientists, right, you can find relationships, associations, when it comes to the findings of your hypothesis, okay? However, I would never actually say one thing causes another, unless I was adamant, the data proved it, and it could be replicated over and over and over again, okay? So when considering causality, so cause and effect relationships, think about how these variables are related. Think about time order, right? Do these things happen in a specific way, a specific pattern, a specific order? And think about spuriousness, right? Where spuriousness is where we try to eliminate all other third variables. Are there more variables that are related to this one specific causing variable or independent variable, okay? So again, the hypothesis. A hypothesis is a statement of relationships, variables, as a statement of relationships among variables or an assumption about how two or more variables are related. It makes a conjectural statement about the relationship between those variables. So the independent variable being the causing variable, the variable that causes a change in the dependent variable, which is the variable that is taking on the effect, okay? So go back to the examples on page 33, go through them, and then think of your own. So let's get into the research methods. And as I said, this lecture is going to be a short lecture because we go over the methods and then that's pretty much it. But the first research method that I want to explain to you guys is surveys, right? So surveys collect data from subjects who respond to a series of questions about behaviors and opinions. This often takes the form of a questionnaire. Many of you have taken questionnaires online, okay? It's one of the most widely used scientific research methods, and one of the reasons that I think it's most widely used is because it's the easiest, right? I can be in the privacy of my own home and take a questionnaire via a phone or through a computer. Most of the time, it's through the computer. I could also remain anonymous if I choose to as the person taking the questionnaire or the survey, okay? This type of research method, using survey, you're getting data back and doing statistical analysis on. Through surveys, you could definitely get, in questionnaires, you could definitely get quantitative and qualitative data, okay? Quantitative being the numbers, qualitative being trends, themes, etc. Okay, for those of you who don't know what a survey or questionnaire might look like, it usually takes the form of a Likert scale. So for example, if you've ever seen or if you've ever taken time to answer a questionnaire, some of the questions look like, how often are you likely to engage in this on a scale of 1 to 10? How likely are you to do this on a scale of 1 to 10? How likely are you to go there on a scale of 1 to 5, et cetera, et cetera? That's the example of a Likert scale. And most questionnaires, most surveys will use Likert type questions. Questionnaires are common, again, are a common research method. And the US Census, which you guys should fill out, have your family fill out, is very important, okay? So this course doesn't go into the importance of why you should fill out the US Census, but you should, because this is how you will get money flowing into your schools, money into the infrastructure in your roads, money into your local hospitals, your local businesses, etc. Okay? The next method is interview methods, right? These are, you guys should know about interviewing methods in general, but they can take 3 different types of forms: unstructured, semi-structured, and structured interviews. Unstructured interviews is usually an interview that is free-flowing. It takes the form of a conversation, right? Pretending that I am the interviewer and you are the interviewee. We would walk into a setting and I would just start interviewing you as if we were not necessarily friends, but we'd have a free-flowing conversation while I was collecting my data. Okay, how are you? Oh, that's great. Oh, yeah, the reason I'm here is I just want to know pretty much about blah, 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 and we'd start talking, okay? It's unstructured. I really have no structure as to how I'm gonna get these answers, but I'm gonna get them through a conversation. Semi-structured, I do have some points that I must get to. And I usually come with these, right, into an interview setting with a notebook and etc. I can come into an unstructured interview with notebook as well, right? But semi-structured, it is slightly more, it's slightly free-flowing as well, but it's more structured. And then the structured interview, I am focusing on the questions that are on my interview list, okay? I have specific things I need to get through, and that's it, okay? Sociological researchers travel across countries and cultures to interact with and observe subjects in their natural environments. And an example, so the research method that goes along with this type of research is field research, okay? Field research, interview methods do go into field research as well, right? But we kind of isolate interview methods with their own. But field research can take other forms, such as passive and participant observation. Passive observation is when the researcher enters the field or the environment and really just observes, looks at, examines the field, okay? They don't have interaction with those individuals or those things in the field. So, for instance, if you're in high school, you might not understand the example I'm going to give right now, but if you are a college student currently, you may have seen a dean, the president of the college, or some form of a supervisor come in and sit in your college classroom on a random day. And they usually sit in the back of the classroom. And all they do is take their notebook and a writing utensil and take notes. They're looking around and just writing everything that they're seeing, that they're hearing, how the teacher is engaging with the students, how the students are engaging with the teacher. That is passive observation. They're not saying anything. They're not saying anything to anyone, okay? Participant observation would be when that researcher, and if I'm using the dean example, coming into the classroom, is actually engaging in the field themselves. So that dean, instead of being passive and now wanting to flip it and be participant, right, would now be asking questions, talking to the teacher. Oh, you should tell them about this. Oh, you should do this instead of that. Okay? More participant. Okay? There are downfalls to this type of research though, right? Generalizability. How relevant are your findings when you're in the field? And one of the things that I want to ask you now is, if a researcher enters the field, can the researcher manipulate or have an effect, right? Cause change as the independent variable, right? Can they cause change in how people behave in that environment? Okay. Can they? When your parents walk into your room, do they cause a change in your behavior, right? If your parents were to come into your high school or the college right now, would you change? Okay, so how generalizable are these findings in field research? Okay, spuriousness, are there multiple variables that could be causing change in the field? And are you accounting for that? The researcher's presence, again, can alter the workflow and the environment. The research that you find, the findings that you find in your research wouldn't necessarily encompass all groups. So if I take the college classroom, if a dean comes in and walks into my college classroom, can I say that all sociology classes operate the same as the sociology class of Dr. Sheila Pierre? Okay. And then personal researcher bias. We are flawed human beings, right? Can I also view things in a skewed manner? Can I be biased in my research? Of course. Field research happens in real locations. Here are some questions to think about, right? What type of environment do workspaces foster? What would a sociology discover in blending in? There's some things to think about. Ethnographies, right? This is an extended observation of the social perspective and cultural values of an entire social setting. They involve objective observation of an entire community. So similar to field research, right? But these are extended periods of time. I know people who have done ethnographies for years, worked on one ethnography for a year, okay? So you're living amongst these individuals, this community, etc. Your book gives an example of a classroom in Muncie, Indiana in 1917, 5 years before John and Helen Lind began researching this typical US community. Read about that, okay? Experiments, these are least often used in sociology and for ethical reasons, right? Your book mentions the Stanley Milgram experiment, and I believe on Blackboard, I do give you 2 examples of field experiments, okay? And why they're least often used. So they're used to test theories, meaning that they investigate relationships to test hypotheses, so a scientific approach. Some of these can be lab-based experiments, or they could be natural or field-based. Your book specifically mentions Stanley Milgram's shock experiment, okay? I want you guys actually to pause, go to your textbook, or even go to the Blackboard and either watch the Stanley Milgram experiment or read about it in your text, either or. But the Stanley Milgram experiment, very controversial. And one of the main reasons as to why it's so controversial is, did Stanley Milgram go too far? Okay, do these scientists go too far in their experiments? Another one that I have posted up in your on your Blackboard is the Stanford prison experiment. Okay, so this is the Dr. Zimbardo experiment with prisoners and guards. Okay, did he go too far? And these take place in a field or a replicated field. Okay, but also, again, they could be lab-based, right? And you should know some of the controversy around experiments done in labs, testing, using a control group, etc. Secondary data analysis, okay? This is data that you didn't collect yourself, you get it from another source. Okay, so if an example of secondary data analysis, not that you guys were doing data analysis in high school, but when your teacher tells you to do a report on World War II, okay, you're using secondary data analysis. Think of some of the sources, think of some of the specific texts that you would use, right? You might go to the internet, go to a World War II, an official World War II government site. That's secondary data analysis. You might use the autobiography of Anne Frank, secondary data analysis, okay? However, what can be some of the issues with secondary data analysis? That's a question I'm gonna post on Flipgrid, but you can one of the main ones that you can think of is, right, the person writing the data or looking at the data, examining it, and interpreting that data, the way that they interpret it can be biased. Okay. The last one is historical and archival. It's used least frequently in sociology. And the only reason why I actually do like this form of research, it's just very time consuming. It can also be very expensive. And a lot of the resources that you would need to use for historical and archival research are historical pieces, historical artifacts that you cannot take out of libraries, okay? If you've ever been into the archives in your library, in your local community, these are pieces that are you have a certain amount of time to look at them. Usually you can't bring a camera in to just take snapshots because it would damage pages and things like that. It's just time consuming, okay? It's like secondary data analysis. It's just, at least with secondary data analysis, I can take that information home and do that report and send it back to a library, okay? Sociologist Francis H. conducted an experiment to explore the correlation, so the relation, the association between traffic stops and race-based bumper stickers. The issue of racial profiling remains a hot button topic today. How would you design a research project around that? Okay, what kind of research do you think Hosteen did? Out of all the types that we just went over, what kind would that fall under? Okay, and then lastly, some things to consider. Ethics is a big one in sociology. okay? Your book doesn't mention the tea room trade. I believe I post that one up as well for you guys to just explore. These are optional, right? You don't have to go in depth, right? But you will be tested on anything's fair game that I lecture on, okay? They're not time consuming, but ethics is a big one in sociology. So I do mention in your Blackboard the tea room trade by Lord Humphreys, right? And this is one of the reasons why we have an institutional review board at every single college and university in the United States, right? Lord Humphreys working on his dissertation. I don't remember the exact date, but his dissertation wants to explore the behaviors of the types of men and the behaviors of these men in a public restroom in a park with other men. So same gender loving men in a public restroom without their consent, okay? Without their consent, which is wrong. Okay, so when it comes to ethics and sociology, you need to protect an individual's rights to privacy, okay? They need to know they're being researched, one, right? And if they choose not to be researched, respect that. If they do, you still have to keep the information that they have told you private. You need to get consent. You need to make sure that the research that you're doing is in good faith. Okay, if you tell somebody you're researching a certain topic, you better be just researching that topic, okay? And also the research should do no harm, okay? Research turns into big publications. Publications can be used to harm certain types of groups. We've seen it before. Okay, we're living through it, okay? And I'm not talking about necessarily politics out there, right? Think of the bell curve, and I will put some excerpts in to Blackboard because I'm just thinking of this right now. But the bell curve that was written by two Harvard scientists, right? That talked about the correlation between brain sizes of whites, Black, Asian, and American Indian brains and their IQs. Okay? And if I am remembering correctly the bell curve, Black and American Indian brains, was it American Indian? It might have been American Indian or Hispanic, but they said that Black and American Indian or Hispanic individuals, or these people in these populations, had smaller brains and therefore a lesser IQ. Okay, this publication was then taken and now used to justify a lot of the standardized tests that we have. Okay, we still live in a society that makes assumptions about Black and brown people every single day based on their skin color. Essentially, that is all that this publication was about. We still do it, okay? These publications revamp stereotypes, like really firm them up, and it's not good. Okay. Lastly, and I think this is the last slide, the politics of doing research. Always figure out, these aren't necessarily in the book, but always figure out how, when you're reading anything, who's funding the research? Okay. What are some of the political consequences of the research? Okay. Predict and control, I don't expect you guys to know that. But the big two, how the research is getting funded, because if a researcher can be biased, if I can be biased, can the person who's funding your research essentially, what is the word that I want to use? Coerce you into finding a specific type of result or a find? Yes. Okay. And here's an example. For instance, imagine if I was working on, let's use a cigarette company. Okay, cigarette company is big, right? We know that cigarettes cause cancer, right? But however, if I was funded by a big tobacco company, right? They're funding my research on, they find out that I'm researching tobacco and its harms on the body, right? We already know that tobacco is related to cancer, right? So, and they fund me all of a sudden. Oh, we want to really fund this research, right? Do you think that I am just going to find a relation to tobacco and death, or do you think that I might find other other variables that might contribute to this death alongside, just to lessen the blow on tobacco? Just a question, because it happens, okay? And then also political consequences. Your pieces could eventually be used to push certain types of agendas, okay? So that's the end of our lecture for week 2, okay? So go over it. The chapter is short. You'll get that. Week 3, we are going to be going over culture, okay? So for this week, all you have to do is read chapter 2. There is a quiz for chapter 2 as well that I will upload. And I believe that's it. But if I missed anything, it's up to you, right? There is a things to do list up in the Blackboard. Make sure you've done everything. Sound good? Have a great day, guys.